Among the countless racks toiling in the Coven of the Whispering Spine's sprawling laboratories, there existed one anomaly, a being designated the Living Key. This particular rack was ancient, far older than most of its brethren, its original form long since forgotten beneath layers of surgical alteration and chemical conditioning. Its brain, though systematically repatterned and stripped of individual ego, possessed an unusual resilience, a stubborn flicker of neural integrity that resisted complete subsumption. This was due in part to a rare genetic quirk, but more so to its singular specialized function. It was the primary interface for the complex biomonitoring systems of the consummate mind's containment vat. Its proximity was absolute, its duties requiring an almost symbiotic connection to the psychic beacon Urianthal had cultivated. The Living Key's existence was one of ceaseless, agonizing service. Its body was a grotesque fusion of organic matter and archaic diagnostic machinery. Its spine was elongated and fused with a data spool, its nervous system directly wired into the vat's sensory arrays. Its eyes, replaced with multiple glistening ocular implants, constantly fed streams of biodata back to Urianthal. It was a silent, uncomplaining sentinel, its mind a blur of genetic readouts, metabolic fluctuations, and psychic resonance patterns. Yet this unique proximity, this direct, unfiltered interface with the consummate mind, began to subtly awaken something within the Living Key. While Urianthal and his inner circle were shielded by layers of arrogance and powerful psychic wards, the Living Key received the psychic emanations raw, unfiltered, directly into its fragmented consciousness. It did not interpret them as thoughts or feelings, but as pure data, as raw intent. And that intent, vast and terrifying, was hunger. It began to perceive the hive mind's true purpose, not as a complex biological experiment, but as an existential imperative, and it saw through the lens of the consummate mind's nascent intelligence the endless void of space, the countless consumed worlds, the relentless march of biomass. It saw not merely a creature, but a galactic process, an ecosystem of consumption. It saw the dark city itself, glittering with psychic energy, as nothing more than a potential feast, a prime source of biomass waiting to be devoured. It understood, with a chilling clarity, that Urianthal's control was a pitiful, fleeting delusion. The Living Key tried to communicate this horrifying revelation. Its vocal cords, surgically modified to emit only precise diagnostic reports, struggled to form words. It attempted to convey the impending doom through guttural warnings, a series of clicks and hisses that mimicked the Tyranid's own crude language, mixed with broken Eldari syllables. It would point frantically at the fluctuating psychic energy readings, or at the growing forms within the vat, its limbs flailing in an attempt to convey the scale of the threat, but its attempts were met with brutal incomprehension. To Urianthal and his disciples, the Living Key was merely a broken tool, malfunctioning under the stress of its duties. Its frantic gesticulations were interpreted as signs of neural degradation, its guttural warnings dismissed as the meaningless babbling of a defective servitor. Its self-inflicted wounds, crude carvings in its own flesh that attempted to mimic the vast, predatory maw of a hive tyrant, were seen as further evidence of its deteriorating state, merely requiring another round of painful repatterning. "The key is overstressed," Urianthal would intone, examining the rack with detached interest. "Its organic components are failing to keep pace with the consummate mind's output. Increase the neural inhibitors. Replace the sensory ganglia." The rack would be dragged away, its silent pleas ignored, its body subjected to yet more excruciating surgeries, its mind further dulled. Each time it returned, it tried again, its desperation growing, its warnings becoming more primal, more desperate. It would clutch at Urianthal's robes, attempting to force his gaze upon the glowing psychic charts, attempting to make him see the doom that was so clearly visible to its own tormented senses. But Urianthal saw only a slave, a tool, a creature incapable of independent thought or meaningful insight. He saw only the data he wanted to see, the confirmation of his own genius. He attributed the Living Key's desperate warnings to envy, or to the irrational fears that pervaded the lesser beings of Commorragh. He was too consumed by his grand project, too confident in his own mastery, to consider that a mere rack, a construct of his own creation, might possess a clearer vision of the truth than he did. The living key became a tragic Cassandra, a voiceless prophet of doom, screaming its warnings into a void of intellectual arrogance. It watched with a growing sense of horror and despair as the psychic beacon it was forced to monitor grew ever stronger, ever more focused, its silent pleas echoing unheard in the sterile, blood-soaked chambers of the Coven. It was a prisoner in its own body, condemned to witness the meticulous cultivation of its own species' demise, unable to break through the impenetrable wall of its master's hubris. The whispers of the hive mind were now loud in the living key's shattered mind, and it knew with absolute certainty that the feast was drawing near. As the Coven of the Whispering Spine ascended to prominence, their magnificent spires, woven from bone and living shadow, began to pulse with a subtle, unholy energy. Deep within their lowest, most heavily shielded vaults, where the Tyranid bioforms were cultivated and dissected, something insidious began to stir. It was not a physical manifestation, but a psychic tremor, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonated beneath the cacophony of Commorragh. At first, these psychic reverberations were dismissed by the Haemonculi as residual energies from their Geller field-derived psychic dampeners, or perhaps the faint, dying echoes of the Imperial Zoanthrope's nascent mind still struggling in its fluidic prison. Urienthal, ever the pragmatist, believed he had accounted for every variable. His containment fields were robust, his psychic suppression protocols meticulously designed. He reasoned that any detectable psychic leakage was simply a byproduct of dealing with exotic alien energies, easily ignored or buffered. However, outside the immediate vicinity of the Coven's labs, the effects were more pronounced, if equally subtle at first. Lesser Kabbalite warriors tasked with guarding the Coven's outer perimeter reported unsettling dreams, visions of endless swarms, of chittering masses consuming all light and sound. They woke in cold sweats, their minds plagued by a primal hunger they could not explain, a gnawing emptiness that spurred them to greater acts of casual cruelty and consumption. Some archons, particularly those with a predisposition for psychic sensitivities, found their waking thoughts invaded by inexplicable impulses, an urge to tear down rather than build, to rend apart rather than sculpt, a growing fascination with raw, unadulterated biological destruction. They spoke of a new, unsettling current in the psychic winds of Commorragh, a subtle discord that frayed the nerves and sharpened the appetite for violence. The more refined, psychically sensitive Eldari, the oracle seers of various crimson cabals and the few remaining spirit seers, experienced these emanations more acutely. They recoiled from the psychic noise emanating from the direction of the Whispering Spine's domain, describing it as a growing void, a cold, hungry presence that whispered not of pain or pleasure, but of utter absolute cessation. Their visions became clouded with chitinous shapes with endless mandibles and the overwhelming scent of biomass. They saw fleeting glimpses of a colossal, unseen entity, a mind so vast and alien that merely contemplating it threatened to shatter their sanity. Yet when they attempted to pinpoint the source, the psychic signature would dissipate, masked by the Coven's dampeners, leaving only a lingering sense of dread and the pervasive, confusing static. Urienthal, when confronted by cautious archons or subtle probes from rival covens, would scoff. He attributed these phenomena to the inherent instability of Commorragh, the ever-present psychic pollution, or the envious machinations of lesser factions seeking to undermine his coven's growing influence. He maintained that his methods were flawless, his control absolute. His arrogance, buttressed by his recent successes, had grown into an impenetrable barrier against introspection. He saw only what he wished to see, a grand experiment under his total dominion. Any suggestion of a threat originating from his own laboratories was met with dismissive contempt, and in cases of persistent inquiry, with gruesome demonstrations of his coven's displeasure. A persistent archon, who dared to suggest that unnatural energies might be emanating from the Whispering Spine, found his entire cabal wiped out by an inexplicable plague of rapidly mutating flesh-eating microbes, a testament to the Coven's mastery over biological warfare and a chilling warning to others. One senior Haemonculus designated Vrax Thal, an ancient wizened being whose body was a mosaic of living flesh and ancient mechanisms, did express a rare moment of doubt. During a review of the Zoanthrope's psychic output, Vrax Thal noted an anomaly, a faint, almost imperceptible pattern of rhythmic pulses beneath the chaotic static. "Master Urienthal," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of papyrus, The psychic resonance of the Xenos bioforms, it is not merely residual, it appears to be organizing, a faint chorus perhaps, seeking a larger choir. Urienthal merely waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense, Vrax. It is merely the inherent complexity of their neural structure attempting to process its isolation, a biological echo, nothing more. My dampeners are functioning at peak efficiency. We have isolated their physical forms. Their psychic expressions are merely a facet of their biology, easily contained. His confidence was unshakable. He believed that if he could contain the body, he could contain the mind. He saw the psychic emanations not as a connection to something vast and horrifying, but as a localized output, another data stream to be processed and controlled. The truth, far more terrifying, was that the nascent Tyranid colony deep within the Coven's spires was slowly, inexorably becoming a beacon. Every successful genetic modification, every amplified cellular replication, every growth spurt of the alien bioforms added a tiny flicker of energy to this growing psychic fire. The contained zoanthrope, while individually weak, acted as a conduit, a primitive antenna. With each experiment, with each successful harvest of modified biomatter, the Haemonculi inadvertently strengthened the very connection they sought to suppress. They were nurturing a psychic node, a cancerous growth of the hive mind's awareness, slowly beginning to pierce the psychic veil between Commorragh and the vast, hungry void of real space. The shadow was not merely falling, it was deepening, gathering substance, and its source lay not in a distant star, but in the very heart of the Dark City's arrogant pursuit of forbidden knowledge. As the psychic reverberations from the Whispering Spine's deepest chambers intensified, a more insidious change began to manifest, striking at the very fabric of the Coven's hierarchy, the lesser racks and servants. These unfortunate beings, already broken and malleable, were constantly in close proximity to the burgeoning Tyranid colony. Their minds, dulled by countless surgeries, chemical repatterning, and an endless regimen of pain, were particularly vulnerable to the subtle alien influence emanating from the hidden labs. The psychic hum that Urienthal so confidently dismissed as residual energy was, in fact, the growing whisper of the nascent hive mind. It was a faint yet pervasive echo of the true synapse, a primordial call to consume, adapt, and expand. It was not a language of words, but of pure instinctual imperative, resonating on a frequency that bypassed conscious thought and burrowed directly into the deepest, most primal layers of the Eldari psyche. The first signs were subtle, easily overlooked amidst the inherent madness of Commorragh. Racks, usually meticulous in their duties, would sometimes pause, their multi-jointed servo arms trembling slightly, their vacant eyes staring blankly at the pulsing vats of Xenos tissue. They would exhibit inexplicable fixations, spending hours polishing the chitin of a contained genistealer, or meticulously grooming the tendrils of a lictor specimen with an unnatural tenderness. Their usual detached cruelty towards each other and their slave fodder diminished, replaced by an unsettling, almost reverential fascination with the Tyranid bioforms. Then came the more disturbing manifestations, self-mutilation, already a common practice within the covens as a form of ritual or punishment, began to take on a new, disturbing character. Instead of the usual intricate incisions or flaying, racks would inflict crude, chitin-like growths upon themselves, attempting to mimic the armor of the Tyranids. They would carve grooves into their own bones, attempting to replicate the serrated claws of a hormigaunt, or graft crude bioluminescent sacs onto their flesh, imagining themselves glowing with the same eerie light as the zoanthrope. These acts were not driven by pain or pleasure, but by an obsessive primal urge to become more like the alien specimens they tended. A particularly disturbing incident involved a rack surgeon named Kassar. Tasked with injecting nutrients into a contained swarm of Ripper bioforms, Kassar was found attempting to consume the nutrient solution directly, his face smeared with the viscous alien fluid. When restrained, he thrashed violently, screaming not in agony, but in a guttural language that no Eldari understood, a chittering, hissing series of sounds that echoed the rapid-fire clicks of a carnifex. He clawed at his own throat, desperately attempting to form a new orifice, a maw more suited to the consumption of raw biomass. This was not the usual madness of the Dark City. This was something colder, more mechanistic, a biological imperative overriding personality. Urienthal and his inner circle, witnessing these disturbances, remained stubbornly blind. They attributed the behavior to the Rack's inherent instability, perhaps exacerbated by localized psychic feedback loops, or simply the psychological toll of prolonged exposure to such potent alien biology. They enhanced the psychic dampeners, administered stronger pain inducers, and increased the frequency of neural repatterning on the afflicted Racks. These measures offered temporary respite, forcing the deeper compulsions back into the subconscious, but they did not sever the growing connection. The psychic influence was akin to a pheromonal trace, a low-level biological command that subtly rewired the primitive instincts of the Racks. It bypassed the higher cortical functions, whispering directly to the parts of the brain responsible for hunger, survival, and replication. It instilled an irrational loyalty to the Tyranid bioforms, an almost parental protectiveness. Racks would meticulously clean the containment fields, ensure the specimens were properly fed, and even attack other Coven members who showed insufficient respect for the alien creatures. This devotion was terrifying in its single-mindedness. It stripped away the last vestiges of individual will, replacing it with a collective, unthinking service to the nascent Tyranid colony. The Coven was unknowingly cultivating not only alien bioforms, but also a cadre of unwitting biological thralls, their minds slowly becoming extensions of the growing Xenos will. Urienthal, engrossed in his grand vision of mastering the Tyranids' adaptability, paid scant attention to the dwindling sanity of his lesser servants. He saw them as tools, and if a tool became dull or warped, it was simply to be sharpened or replaced. He was too consumed by the intoxicating prospect of integrating a Tyranid's synaptic link into his future creations, a means of instant, perfect biological control, to notice that the source of that very link was already beginning to assert its own alien dominion over his own forces. The irony was utterly lost on him. He sought to master a tool, unaware that the tool itself was subtly reshaping the hand that held it, preparing it for the greater will that would soon engulf them all. The whispering hunger was growing louder, and the lower echelons of the Coven were the first to hear its dreadful call. The growing anomaly within the Coven of the Whispering Spines domain, once a mere psychic static, had intensified into an undeniable current, a turbulent psychic maelstrom beneath the placid surface of Urienthal's projected control. Even within the Haemonculi's inner circle, the tightly bound coils of their self-assurance began to unravel, leading to unprecedented rifts and open disagreements. For beings whose very existence was predicated on absolute intellectual and surgical dominion, the notion of an uncontrollable variable was anathema, a festering wound in their collective psyche. The most vocal dissent came from an ancient Haemonculus named Xiphon the Unmarred. Unlike many of his brethren, Xiphon had chosen to preserve his original Eldari form, believing true mastery lay in the perfection of the natural rather than its grotesque alteration. His skin, though scarred by ritualistic cutting, remained unaugmented, his senses keen and unburdened by cybernetic interference. Xiphon had been amongst the first to notice the unnatural growth rate of the Tyranid specimens, their startling resistance to the Coven's finest biological inhibitors, and the increasingly disturbing psychic emanations that slipped past even Urienthal's most advanced dampeners. Master Urienthal, Xiphon rasped during a tense convocation, his voice a sibilant hiss that sliced through the sterile air. The zoanthrope's psychic output is escalating. It is no longer a localized ripple. It is a sustained current, growing in amplitude. And the lesser bioforms, their growth patterns deviate from any known biological model. They adapt, they mutate, they overcome our suppressants faster than we can devise them. This is not mere life. It is a calculated collective will. Urienthal, perched on a throne of flayed servitor skin, his many limbs twitching impatiently, dismissed the concerns with a wave of a scalpel. Xiphon, your antiquated adherence to natural forms blinds you to true progress. These are merely highly evolved xenos, predictable in their patterns of growth, albeit accelerated. My containment protocols are flawless. The psychic emanations are residual feedback from the forced neural repatterning of their synaptic pathways. We are breaking their will, not succumbing to theirs. His tone dripped with patronizing contempt, a clear signal that he viewed Xiphon's caution as a weakness, a lack of intellectual daring. However, Xiphon was not alone. Other elder Haemonculi, those whose memories stretched back centuries, even millennia, to the early incursions of the Great Devourer into the galaxy, harbored a deep-seated unease. They remembered the grim warnings whispered amongst the ancient craft worlds, the tales of entire star systems consumed, of civilizations wiped clean by an incomprehensible hunger. While they shared Urienthal's hubris, their caution was tempered by a more profound respect for forces beyond their immediate control. They had seen the true face of oblivion, a lesson Urienthal, shielded by his fervent belief in his own genius, had yet to learn. The concern was not merely abstract. The Tyranid bioforms were demonstrating a troubling synergy. Instead of individual specimens reacting in isolation, they seemed to be coordinating, albeit subtly. When one containment field was breached, another, seemingly unrelated specimen would simultaneously exhibit an identical rapid mutation designed to exploit a new weakness in its own defenses. It was as if a nascent, invisible network was beginning to form between them, learning from each other's failures and successes entirely independent of the Haemonculi's interventions. The patterns suggest a distributed intelligence, but ventured another Haemonculus, a stoic being named Kalen, his face a mask of polished steel and sutured flesh. A rudimentary synaptic net, perhaps, forming across the specimens. This implies a collective memory, a shared purpose beyond simple instinct. Urienthal merely laughed, and a dry, grating sound. A delightful hypothesis, Kalen, but pure conjecture. We are creating these conditions, forcing these adaptations. We are shaping their evolution, not the other way around. Their collective memory, if it exists, is merely a reflection of the parameters we impose upon them. He refused to entertain the idea that the Tyranids might be acting in concert, that their individual forms were merely extensions of a greater unseen entity. Such a notion would diminish his own mastery, his own control, and that was anathema to his very being. The internal strife escalated into thinly veiled threats and, eventually, gruesome demonstrations. When Xiphon continued to voice his objections, presenting meticulously compiled data showing exponential increases in psychic energy output and unprecedented genetic instability, Urienthal decided to make an example. He accused Xiphon of intellectual stagnation and heretical adherence to natural limitations. Xiphon was publicly flayed, his unmarred flesh meticulously peeled from his bones, before being painfully remade into a grotesque sentient display piece for the Coven's trophy hall, his still-living eyes forced to gaze upon the pulsing vats of Tyranid biomass. This act of savage reprisal silenced the overt dissent. The remaining elder Haemonculi, though still harboring deep-seated fears, dared not challenge Urienthal directly. They retreated into their own sublabs, focusing on smaller-scale experiments, offering Urienthal feigned compliance while privately expressing their profound unease. They still believed in the eventual triumph of their craft, but a cold dread began to gnaw at them, a premonition of something incomprehensible gaining strength in their very midst. Urienthal, however, interpreted the silence as affirmation. He saw the elimination of dissent as proof of his righteous path. He was convinced that he had merely pruned the weak, allowing the strong and the bold to thrive. His hubris, now unchecked by any internal challenge, grew to monstrous proportions. He believed he was on the cusp of an unparalleled breakthrough, a discovery that would revolutionize flesh crafting and elevate the Coven of the Whispering Spine to godlike status. He remained oblivious to the fact that the subtle, organized intelligence Xiphon had warned about was not merely internal to his bioforms, but reaching out, tentatively at first, then with increasing strength, seeking its connection to a far greater consciousness in the void beyond Commorragh's veil. The silence was not agreement, it was the chilling calm before the storm, a storm of biological horror that Urienthal had painstakingly brewed himself. The Coven of the Whispering Spine's deepest sanctum, a colossal, inverted spire composed of flensed bone and dark pulsating metals, became the crucible. Within its labyrinthine corridors, where the air itself was a potent cocktail of formaldehyde, galvanic currents, and the musky scent of tortured flesh, the Tyranid specimens were laid out upon obsidian slabs. Each chamber, shielded by layers of force fields and molecular dampeners, was a microenvironment meticulously crafted to both contain and facilitate the excruciating dissection and vivisection that was about to commence. Thousands of lesser racks, their bodies warped and minds dulled by countless surgeries, scuttled through the sterile, grim halls, tending to the intricate machinery, replenishing vials of reactive enzymes and sharpening blades to monomolecular edges. Urienthal, A figure of gaunt elegance, his spine elongated and twisted into a graceful, predatory curve, oversaw every incision, every extraction, every agonized twitch of the alien forms. His voice, usually devoid of overt emotion, now carried a faint tremor of intellectual excitement. "Observe the intricate folding of the neural pathways, my disciples," he would hiss, gesturing with a multi-jointed servo arm that pulsed with low-level energies. "The redundancy of their vital organs. These creatures are designed for survival, for replication under the most adverse conditions. A truly magnificent design, if utterly devoid of aesthetic grace." Initial experiments focused on understanding the Tyranids' fundamental biology. Genestealers were flayed alive, their internal organs mapped with glowing tendrils of psychic energy. Hormagaunts were subjected to accelerated cellular degradation, only for their tissues to regenerate at an alarming rate, far exceeding any known life form. Lictors, encased in stasis fields, had their synaptic connections probed, their predatory instincts laid bare for the Haemonculi to admire and, ultimately, to emulate. The juvenile zoanthrope, suspended in a fluidic containment field, was a particular fascination. Its latent psychic emanations, though weak, were a source of profound curiosity, hinting at a collective consciousness beyond the individual bioforms. Urienthal had a particular affinity for the arcane energies of the mind, seeing them as merely another form of biological expression, waiting to be bent to his will. The speed of the Tyranids' adaptability was the first true challenge. Early attempts to cultivate tissue samples in nutrient baths met with unexpected results. The samples would rapidly develop resistance to the chemical agents intended to stimulate growth or inhibit decay, often evolving entirely new cellular structures within hours. A particular culture of hormagaunt muscle tissue, initially starved, developed an unprecedented ability to derive sustenance from ambient atmospheric particles, transforming inert gases into usable energy. Containment fields designed to suppress genetic drift proved porous against the Tyranids' relentless drive to evolve. A batch of isolated genestealer cells exposed to a low-level radiation field developed a new chitinous layer that absorbed the harmful rays, rendering the method useless within a single cycle. These initial failures were not met with despair, but with a heightened sense of intellectual triumph. Each unexpected adaptation, each seemingly insurmountable obstacle, only served to fuel the Haemonculi's already colossal hubris. They interpreted these challenges not as warnings, but as proof of the Tyranids' magnificent biological engineering, and by extension, a greater prize to be conquered. "This is not weakness," Urienthal pronounced after a particularly aggressive containment breach by a regenerating lictor limb, which had to be vaporized by an emergency plasma field, but a demonstration of raw potential. "Our initial parameters were simply insufficient. We must push harder, learn faster, become as adaptable as our specimens." New, ever more intricate containment protocols were designed. Psychic dampeners, stolen from a shattered Imperial frigate's Geller field generator, were repurposed and amplified, surrounding each chamber. Bioscanners of unheard-of sensitivity monitored every cellular division, every metabolic shift. Servo skulls laden with specialized toxin injectors and cauterizing lasers floated through the chambers, ready to neutralize any rogue biological matter. The Coven poured vast resources into refining their methodology, their efforts driven by a fervent belief that sheer ingenuity and surgical precision could overcome any biological imperative. Urienthal spent weeks in near solitary study, his eyes glowing with an unholy light as he reviewed holographic projections of Tyranid anatomy, speculating on their genetic code and their neural architecture. He personally modified surgical instruments to bypass their hardened chitin, developed new anesthetic compounds that could subdue their alien physiologies without killing them, and devised excruciatingly precise methods of extracting and grafting viable genetic material. He began to introduce small, controlled quantities of Dark Eldar genetic sequences, fragments of Kabbalite warriors, racks, even a particularly potent Archon's essence, into the Tyranid cultures, observing with perverse delight as the Xenos cells struggled to integrate the foreign data, sometimes consuming it, sometimes mutating into entirely new hybrid forms that lasted only moments before collapsing into slop. One particular incident served as a potent, albeit ultimately misinterpreted, lesson. A contained hormagaunt, its limbs surgically removed and replaced with crude cybernetic prosthetics, managed to generate new chitinous blades from its stumps within hours. tearing through its adamantium cage and attacking a nearby rack surgeon. The creature's aggressive regeneration was beyond anything predicted. It took a squad of heavily armed incubi to finally subdue and vaporize the raging horror. The rack surgeon, half devoured but still alive, was swiftly taken for reconstructive surgery, ensuring no valuable research time was lost. Instead of caution, this event spurred Urienthal to greater heights of ambition. Their will to live, their drive to adapt, is boundless, he mused, examining the mangled remains of the cage. We shall not merely replicate it, we shall transcend it. We shall make it our own. If they can regenerate, we shall make them immortal. If they can adapt, we shall make them perfectly malleable. He saw the Tyranids not as a force of nature, but as a complex biological puzzle, a grand, intricate mechanism waiting to be reverse-engineered and re-engineered according to his superior intellect. The Coven of the Whispering Spine, he declared, would be the first to truly master the Great Devourer, to bend its primal essence to their intricate designs. The idea that something could exist beyond their capacity for control, beyond their surgical mastery, was a concept utterly alien to their collective, deluded minds. Their arrogance was a thick, impenetrable shield, deflecting any glimmer of true insight, any whisper of the doom they were so meticulously cultivating. The intensive period of dissection and genetic mapping began to yield results, not merely an understanding, but an application. The Coven of the Whispering Spine, fueled by Urienthal's relentless ambition, started to integrate selected Tyranid biomatter traits into their existing flesh-crafting practices. Their initial experiments focused on the most desirable aspects: rapid regeneration, enhanced musculature, and the unparalleled resilience of Tyranid chitin. These were the fundamental building blocks, the raw materials from which a new generation of grotesque horrors would be born. The first beneficiaries of this dark synthesis were the grotesques, the hulking, monstrous guardians of the covens. Traditionally, these creatures were fashioned from the tormented bodies of abducted races, stretched and twisted beyond recognition, their forms imbued with unnatural strength through a cocktail of surgical enhancements and chemical stimulants. Now, with the infusion of Tyranid genetics, they became something far more terrifying. Their already formidable bulk was bolstered by strands of hormigaunt muscle fiber, granting them bursts of impossible speed and power. Their leathery hides were interwoven with microscopic Tyranid chitin platelets, dramatically increasing their resistance to kinetic impact and energy weapons. These neo-grotesques, as Urienthal termed them, were larger, faster, and possessed a chilling, animalistic ferocity that exceeded even the most deranged of their predecessors. Their screams were deeper, their roars more primal, and their hunger for destruction, typically a conditioned response, now seemed to possess a deeper organic root. Racks, the Coven's surgical apprentices and foot soldiers, also underwent a gruesome metamorphosis. While retaining their delicate, often beautiful, yet unsettlingly pale features and numerous surgical implements, their underlying biology was subtly reshaped. Fragments of Tyranid regenerative tissue were woven into their nervous systems, allowing them to recover from wounds that would instantly kill a lesser being. Their skin, once merely tough, became unnaturally dense, capable of deflecting glancing blows. Their agility, already considerable, was elevated by the subtle integration of lictor, stalker gland biosymbiotes, enhancing their reflexes and stealth capabilities. They moved with a disturbing, almost insectoid grace, their many limbs articulating with a newfound unsettling fluidity. Urienthal delighted in these practical applications. He showcased his creations in the gladiatorial arenas of Commorragh, where the dark heart of the city beat loudest. His neo-grotesques tore through rival Kabbalite warriors and incubi champions with unprecedented brutality, their raw power and resilience confounding their opponents. The racks, enhanced with their insidious new traits, executed surgical strikes with blinding speed, disarming and dissecting foes before they could react. The spectacle was utterly captivating for the jaded audiences of the Dark City, hungry for novelty and extreme violence. Whispers of the Coven of the Whispering Spine's breakthroughs began to circulate through the shadowy districts of Commorragh. Other covens, notoriously jealous and secretive, sent their emissaries to observe, to probe, to glean the nature of Urienthal's innovations. Archons, ever eager for new weapons and stronger bodyguards, approached with offers of vast wealth and legions of slaves in exchange for these enhanced bioforms. Urienthal, with typical Haemonculus inscrutability, spun elaborate tales of rediscovered Eldar archaeotech and esoteric Xenos flora from forgotten segments of the webway. He spoke of exotic reagents and ancient alchemical processes, carefully omitting any mention of the Tyranids. This deception was crucial, for even the most audacious Haemonculus would hesitate to openly declare their experimentation with a species universally reviled as an existential threat. The Archons and rival Haemonculi, blinded by their own greed and thirst for power, swallowed the lies whole, eager to believe in a new controllable source of power rather than a terrifying, unpredictable one. His reputation soared. The Coven of the Whispering Spine rose rapidly in influence and prestige. Their spires, once merely opulent, now bristled with newly commissioned defensive systems and pulsed with the unholy light of constant flesh crafting. Their fame was cemented during the infamous Battle of the Bleeding Spire, a brutal territorial conflict between the Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue and the Obsidian Rose. Urienthal, having aligned himself strategically with the Obsidian Rose, unleashed a contingent of his Tyranid-enhanced grotesques and racks. The creatures ripped through the opposing forces, their resilience allowing them to shrug off sustained fire, their newfound ferocity driving them into the enemy lines with unstoppable momentum. The battle was a bloody spectacle, a testament to the grotesque power Urienthal now wielded. The Obsidian Rose secured a decisive victory, and Urienthal's prestige was solidified. Within the Coven's inner sanctums, Urienthal became even more obsessed. The successful integration of Tyranid traits into his existing creations only affirmed his belief in his own genius. He saw these living weapons as mere precursors, crude sketches of what true mastery could achieve. If he could extract and implement specific traits, could he not eventually control the entire genetic blueprint? If he could make a grotesque stronger, could he not make it immortal? If he could make a rack faster, could he not make it perfectly adaptable to any environment, even the void itself? The sheer scope of the Tyranid genome, its alien elegance and its simplicity of purpose, consumption and evolution, enthralled him. He imagined a future where the Eldari, through his Coven's craft, could shed their reliance on the webway, on the frailties of spirit and body, and become something new, something truly invincible. His ambition spiraled, twisting into a grand vision of biological transcendence, a delusion that the Tyranids were not a threat, but merely a primitive key to unlock the true potential of flesh. He spent more and more time in the deepest, most shielded chambers, personally overseeing the cultivation of larger, more complex Tyranid bioforms. Where before he worked with isolated cells and muscle tissue, now he began to cultivate entire organs, even rudimentary circulatory systems, suspended in vast vats of nutrient solution. He began to observe patterns in the psychic emanations of the zoanthrope, realizing that they were not merely residual, but perhaps integral to the Tyranid's biological functions, a form of alien communication or coordination. He dismissed it, however, as a mere biological curiosity, another aspect to be controlled and weaponized, rather than an inherent dangerous connection to something far greater and more terrifying. His success had blinded him, reinforcing the fatal flaw of his species, the unshakable belief in their own intellectual and physical superiority, even in the face of an enemy designed to consume all. The seeds were germinating, their roots beginning to tap into something far older and hungrier than any Haemonculus could comprehend. The void between stars was a canvas for atrocities, but none so elegantly gruesome as the flesh-crafting practiced by the Haemonculi of Commorragh. For millennia, the Covens had plumbed the depths of biological horror, twisting sinew and bone into exquisite instruments of agony, sculpting life itself into baroque mockeries of creation. They knew no limit, recognized no sanctity of form, viewing the very concept of natural as a challenge to be overcome, a restriction to be shattered. Among these practitioners of forbidden science, the Coven of the Whispering Spine stood as a beacon of audacious ambition, their particular obsession being the ultimate mastery over all biological processes, an unyielding pursuit of a perfected form, unbound by evolution or fate. They sought to render the frailties of existence obsolete, to distill the very essence of life and pain into an eternal, compliant state. Their master Haemonculus, Urienthal, was not the most ancient nor the most notorious, but he possessed a hunger that gnawed at the edges of sanity, even for a denizen of the Dark City. He envisioned not merely manipulating flesh, but transcending it, transforming biological matter into an endlessly adaptable medium, capable of resisting the decay of time, the ravages of war, and even the insidious embrace of Slaanesh. His labs, nestled deep within a spire ship of flayed human skin and obsidian, thrummed with the sickly sweet scent of vitae and ozone, a symphony of tortured organic matter being perpetually remade. The catalyst for their ultimate undoing arrived not as a prophecy or a curse, but as a prize cloaked in the grim efficiency of opportunistic piracy. The infamous Corsair captain, Vorlog the Scarred, a brash and brutal archon in his own right, had returned from a deep real space raid with a haul unlike any other. His raiding party had stumbled upon a derelict Imperial research vessel, its hull breached and half-digested, adrift in the desolate reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus. The vessel was a tomb, its crew long since devoured, but within its deepest, most secure holds, shielded by failing force fields and redundant adamantium bulkheads, Vorlog's warriors discovered something extraordinary. Cryopreservation units, flickering weakly, containing live Tyranid bioforms. These were not the teeming hordes of a full Hive Fleet, but isolated specimens, recovered and studied by the Imperium before the inevitable consumption. Genestealers, lictors, hormagaunts, and even a juvenile zoanthrope suspended in an artificial coma, their chitin glinting under the emergency lights. Vorlog, ever the opportunist, recognized their value, even if he did not fully comprehend their nature. He knew only that the Haemonculi coveted novelty, especially biological curiosities, and these alien creatures were unlike anything the Dark City had ever seen. Their forms were grotesque, yet terrifyingly efficient, their biology a nightmare of adaptive horror. The exchange was brutal, as all transactions in Commorragh were. Vorlog demanded a heavy toll in slaves, souls, and grotesque enhancements for his cabal. Urienthal, his spindly fingers trembling with an uncharacteristic eagerness, paid it all without hesitation, his cold, calculating eyes alight with a nascent, unholy fascination. He saw not a threat, but a boundless reservoir of possibility, a new frontier of flesh to conquer and reshape. The Tyranid specimens were swiftly transported to the deepest chambers of the Coven of the Whispering Spine, a sanctum within a sanctum, sealed against all intrusion. As the stasis fields flickered and died, revealing the alien horrors in their quiescent state, a profound silence fell over Urienthal and his inner circle of Haemonculi. They observed the chitinous plates, the unnatural musculature, the predatory efficiency etched into every cell. This was not merely alien life. This was life honed to a singular, terrifying purpose: consumption and adaptation. Urienthal's voice, usually a dry rasp, was imbued with a rare, almost reverent awe. "Observe, my children," he hissed, gesturing with a scalpel that seemed to pulse with faint energy. "The Great Devourer. They consume, they adapt, they evolve with a speed that defies our understanding. They are the ultimate biological engine, driven by an instinct beyond simple predation." He paused, his gaze fixed on the slack jaw of a lictor, its head bristling with sensory tendrils. "But instinct is merely an unrefined blueprint. Imagine if we could harness that adaptability, control that evolution, temper that raw hunger with our own magnificent intellect. Imagine the mastery we could achieve." His apprentices, their faces obscured by grotesque masks of stitched flesh and gleaming chrome, murmured in agreement. Their needles and blades twitched in anticipation. They saw only the potential, the raw material for a new form of supremacy. The very idea of the Tyranids being anything more than another species to dissect, to experiment upon, to ultimately dominate, was anathema to their profound arrogance. They were the masters of flesh, and no biological entity, no matter how terrifying in real space, could escape their surgical mastery within the confines of Commorragh. They believed they could break the hive mind's will, bend its genetic imperative to their own twisted designs. They believed they could create a new horror, a perfected predator, a weapon unlike any other, all under their absolute control. They would turn the Great Devourer into their obedient pet, a testament to their unparalleled genius. The irony of their hubris, the ultimate cost of their ambition, remained tragically unseen, veiled by the impenetrable darkness of their own self-assured malice. The seeds of Commorragh's doom had just been sown, not by an invading army or a catastrophic warp storm, but by the cold, calculating hand of a Haemonculus seeking to perfect the imperfect. The impossible happened. Far out in the cold, desolate reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus, a Tyranid splinter fleet, one of countless tendrils of the encroaching Leviathan, inexplicably veered off course. Its intended trajectory, a predictable path towards a resource-rich imperial world, warped and bent with unnerving precision. Instead, it charted a direct, unswerving path towards a seemingly empty patch of void, a place where no stars shone, no planets offered biomass, a place that was, in truth, an invisible nexus point where Commorragh subtly interfaced with real space. The psychic beacon, diligently refined and amplified by Urienthal's unwitting hand, had finally provided the Great Devourer with its unmistakable target. Within the central chamber of the whispering spine, the consummate mind pulsed with an intensity that rattled the very foundations of the spire. Its psychic output, even through Urienthal's most powerful dampeners, now approached a crescendo. It was a symphony of alien hunger, a primal scream of identification and anticipation. The carefully constructed psychic suppression arrays shrieked and groaned under the strain, arcs of raw energy lashing out, burning scorch marks into the obsidian walls. The atmosphere in the chamber became heavy, charged with an invisible pressure that made the air itself seem to hum with a malevolent presence. Urienthal, still linked via his neural interface, felt the surge. He initially interpreted it as a sign of the consummate mind's mastery, its readiness to receive his commands. He believed it was merely testing its own limits, asserting its burgeoning power under his careful tutelage. He intensified his own mental commands, attempting to force it into submission, to quell the surge with sheer force of will. But for the first time, he felt a resistance, a vast alien current that pushed back against his finely honed intellect. The living key, permanently attached to the vat's diagnostic systems, shrieked. Its ocular implants flared, overwhelming its optical nerves. Its numerous sensory tendrils thrashed wildly, ripping free from the biomonitors. It was receiving the full, unadulterated torrent of the hive mind's awakening, an onslaught of pure telepathic hunger. It saw with horrifying clarity the vast, churning mass of the splinter fleet, its bioships cutting through the void, drawn like moths to a flame. It saw the colossal, multi-eyed form of a hive tyrant, its mind a conduit for the greater will, focusing its predatory gaze directly upon the Coven's spires, upon the pulsing heart of the Dark City. As the psychic scream reached its crescendo, the fabric of reality itself began to fray around the whispering spine. The localized warp distortions that had plagued the adjacent districts intensified, becoming gaping tears in space. Small, chaotic breaches into the immaterium appeared spontaneously, spitting out minor warp entities that shrieked and clawed at the air before dissipating, unable to sustain themselves in the presence of the far greater, more focused alien will. These were mere echoes of the instability, however. The true focus of the distortion was centered directly on the Coven's hubris. At the very edge of Commorragh's nearest real space exit point, the void began to shimmer. A rift, raw and unstable, began to tear open, not through the controlled precision of a webway gate, but through the brute force of an incoming Tyranid psychic presence. It was a monumental feat, a violation of the very principles that protected the Dark City, but the psychic beacon had burned too brightly, too long, and had provided a clear path. The psychic signature of the consummate mind within the vat and the incoming psychic roar of the Hive Fleet converged, creating a feedback loop of terrifying power. The delicate balance of Urienthal's suppression arrays was utterly overwhelmed. One by one, the crystalline towers exploded, showering the chamber in shards of energy and debris. The massive containment vat shuddered violently, its adamantium clamps groaning under an unbearable internal pressure. The amniotic fluid began to boil and churn, turning a sickly black as the consummate mind thrashed within its prison. Urienthal, still mentally linked, felt the full, unfiltered wrath of the hive mind. It was a vast, cold intelligence, utterly devoid of emotion, yet radiating a predatory hunger that dwarfed anything he could comprehend. He was a mere whisper against a cosmic hurricane. His mind recoiled, shattered by the sheer magnitude of the alien consciousness. The connection, which he had believed to be a conduit of his control, became a channel for his own overwhelming terror. He saw in a flash of dreadful clarity his life's work, his ambition, his entire species, reduced to nothing more than organic fodder, a delicious new strain of biomass. The Splinter Fleet was no longer an abstract threat in distant real space. Its vanguard bioforms, scythe-limbed horrors and chitin-armored beasts, were now visible through the tearing rift, silhouetted against the desolate void, their eyes glowing with an alien hunger. The psychic scream from within the Coven's spires reached its final, deafening pitch, a desperate, triumphant call across the void. The bait had been taken. The lure had worked. The Great Devourer was here. The moment the final, deafening psychic scream from Urienthal's consummate mind reached its zenith, the massive containment vat, the centerpiece of the Coven's hubris, ruptured with a thunderous explosion. Adamantium clamps, designed to withstand cataclysmic pressures, sheared apart like brittle bone. The superheated amniotic fluid, a toxic soup of bioenhancers and genetic stimulants, erupted outwards in a scorching wave, dissolving flesh and metal alike. From the shattered remains of the vat, the synthetic Norn Queen surrogate, no longer contained or suppressed, burst forth. It was a nightmare incarnate, a colossal, chitinous abomination, its form still slick with embryonic fluid, yet fully matured, its many limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, flexed with terrifying power, its head, a grotesque crown of synaptic tendrils, pulsed with malevolent energy, its multiple eyes glowing with an alien intelligence now fully awakened and unchained. Its internal organs, once meticulously mapped and controlled, now churned with the horrific efficiency of a true Norn queen, already beginning to generate a new tide of bioforms. The psychic dampeners, the crystalline towers Urienthal had erected with such confidence had all exploded, their complex mechanisms reduced to molten slag. The energy feedback loop from the consummate mind and the incoming Hive Fleet had been too immense, too absolute. With its psychic inhibitors shattered, the synthetic Norn Queen unleashed its true, unbridled power. It was not merely a beacon. It was a living synapse node, a direct conduit to the greater hive mind, its consciousness fully integrated into the vast cosmic intelligence. A wave of psionic force, raw and agonizing, tore through the central chamber. The remaining Haemonculi, their minds already battered by the preceding psychic onslaught, collapsed. Their elaborate mental wards, once formidable, were now utterly useless against the primal, focused will of the Tyranid collective. Urienthal himself, still mentally linked, felt his consciousness being ripped apart, his carefully constructed ego dissolving under the sheer, unfeeling pressure of the alien mind. He saw, in a final horrifying vision, not a tool to be controlled, but a predator, boundless and eternal, consuming all in its path. His magnificent intellect, his life's ambition, withered into insignificance. Then came the progeny. From the vast, pulsating maw on the Norn Queen's surrogate's underside, a torrent of nascent Tyranid bioforms began to pour out. These were not the controlled, modified specimens Urienthal had cultivated, but rapidly evolving horrors, adapted for the unique environment of Commorragh. Hormagaunts with enhanced chitin and venomous talons, genetically programmed for close-quarters butchery within labyrinthine corridors. Genostealers, their claws tipped with psychoreactive poisons, their minds broadcasting a focused terror. Smaller, swarming rippers, their mandibles adapted to chew through both metal and flesh, ravenous for any organic material. The Coven's lab, once a sterile sanctuary of grotesque flesh crafting, became a slaughterhouse. Racks, their minds shattered and instincts now fully overridden by the nascent hive mind, turned on their former masters. They tore at the Haemonculi, their surgical implements repurposed for raw, unthinking butchery, their faces contorted into alien masks of devotion to the new, true master. The Coven's intricate defensive systems, designed to repel intruders, were useless against an enemy that had been nurtured from within, an enemy that was literally spawned from their own misguided genius. The Norn Queen surrogate, now fully integrated into the hive mind, continued to generate new horrors, each one perfectly suited for the dark confines of Commorragh. It adapted to the specific psychic resonances of the Dark City, enhancing the neural pathways of its creations to exploit the Eldari's inherent sensitivity to pain and fear. The air became thick with the scent of alien ichor, ozone, and the blood of Haemonculi, a bitter perfume of ultimate defeat. Simultaneously, through the gaping, unstable rift that now tore open real space at the very edge of Commorragh, the vanguard of the Tyranid splinter fleet poured forth. led by a colossal hive tyrant, its wings beating the vacuum of the void, its eyes burning with a cold, predatory intelligence. The first waves of bioships slipped through the shimmering portal. Sporadic warp storms raged around the rift, but the focused psychic might of the hive mind, now directed by the consummate mind, kept it stable enough for the initial incursion. The hive tyrant, a towering engine of destruction, was a terrifyingly efficient commander. It immediately sensed the rich psychic emanations of the Dark City, the boundless feast of Eldari souls, and oriented itself directly towards the source of the beacon, the Coven of the Whispering Spine. It issued a silent telepathic command, and its bioforms, released from their vessels, swarmed forth, adapting instantaneously to the unnatural void and the strange, anti-gravitational fields of Commorragh's outer reaches. Urienthal, the master flesh-crafter, the architect of his species' potential demise, perished not with a scream, but with a horrifying, silent understanding. His neural interface, instead of offering control, had offered a direct channel for the hive mind to consume his very consciousness. His body, a masterpiece of grotesque augmentation, was torn apart by the very grotesques he had infused with Tyranid biomass, their enhanced claws now obeying the ultimate alien master. His last fragmented thought was of his profound error, the utter futility of his ambition, as his life force was devoured, a final delicious morsel for the insatiable hunger he had unleashed. The sacrifice had been made not by a hero, but by a deluded villain, and it paved the way for salvation not for Commorragh, but for the Great Devourer. The aftermath of the consummate mind's catastrophic breach was swift and devastating, unfurling a horror that Commorragh, for all its millennia of depravity, had never truly faced. The Coven of the Whispering Spine, once a beacon of audacious ambition, was utterly consumed within hours. Its magnificent spires, woven from bone and dark metal, became a charnel house, a grotesque spawning ground for alien horrors. The synthetic Norn Queen surrogate, now fully integrated into the hive mind and acting as its primary synaptic node within the Dark City, pulsed with obscene life. From its vast cancerous maw, new bioforms poured forth in an endless torrent. These creatures were terrifyingly efficient, adapted with frightening speed to the unique environment of Commorragh. Gaunts developed chitinous spikes to scale sheer spire walls. Lictors became ethereal blurs capable of navigating the city's complex gravitational fields. And Genestealers mutated with heightened psychic resonance, allowing them to pierce the mental defenses of even veteran Cabalite warriors. The labyrinthine corridors and opulent chambers of the Whispering Spine became choked with writhing, chittering masses of alien life. Every drop of blood, every discarded fragment of flesh, every psychic echo was meticulously harvested by swarms of rippers and devourers, contributing to the growing biomass of the emerging Tyranid colony. The Coven's extensive nutrient vats, filled with precious bioliquids and growth stimulators, were instantly co-opted, becoming breeding pools for new waves of Xenos nightmares. The sophisticated biological machinery of the Haemonculi, designed to sculpt and twist life, was turned against them, becoming tools for the Great Devourer's rapid assimilation. Within the districts adjacent to the Coven's now overrun spires, chaos erupted. The Archons and Cabals who had once eagerly sought Urienthal's grotesque enhancements found themselves facing the fruits of his hubris. Their enhanced grotesques and racks, imbued with Tyranid biomass, became compromised. The psychic commands of the hive mind, now flowing unhindered from the Norn Queen surrogate, easily overrode the crude mental conditioning of the Haemonculi. Many of these augmented creatures turned on their masters, their alien-infused bodies becoming vectors of destruction, tearing through Cabalite ranks with savage, unthinking ferocity. Panic rippled through the Dark City. This was not the familiar terror of rival raids or the calculated violence of arena combat. This was an unreasoning, all-consuming horror. The Tyranids did not seek slaves or pain. They sought biomass, pure and simple. They devoured without malice, without joy, leaving behind only desiccated husks and utter biological desolation. For a city built on the exquisite appreciation of suffering, this blunt, efficient consumption was a profound, soul-shattering affront. Through the massive, unstable rift at the edge of Commorragh, the Tyranid splinter fleet poured in, Brood after brood of hive ships, their organic hulls pulsating with malign life, entered the void around the dark city, drawn by the irresistible psychic beacon. Hive tyrants, their minds linked to the Norn Queen surrogate, directed the initial invasion, sending waves of gargantuan bioforms directly into Commorragh's outer districts. Carnifexes, their armored bulk shrugging off laser fires, smashed through the illusionary walls of the webway. Raveners burrowed through the impossibly dense structures of the dark city, their speed and agility unmatched. Commorragh's formidable defenses, designed to repel conventional incursions and warp entities, found themselves struggling against an enemy that defied all known categorizations. Their grav impellers, designed to catch fleeing real space vessels, snagged monstrous bioships. Their laser batteries, optimized for void combat, barely scratched the thick chitin of the larger Tyranid organisms. The unpredictable, shifting nature of the webway, usually Commorragh's greatest defense, became a liability. The Tyranids, guided by the Norn Queen surrogate, adapted to its peculiarities, their psychic senses guiding them through its treacherous pathways, their biology evolving to overcome its environmental hazards. The ruling archons, typically embroiled in endless internecine warfare, were forced into an uneasy, temporary alliance. They understood, with a dawning horror, that this was an existential threat. This was not merely another war. This was an extinction event. Even Vect, the ancient and cunning overlord of Commorragh, felt a chill that pierced his millennia of hardened indifference. He marshaled his forces, the formidable might of the cabal of the Black Heart. But even his vast power seemed puny against the endless, unthinking tide of the Great Devourer. Commorragh, the supposedly impregnable city, the eternal refuge from Slaanesh, had been breached, not by an external foe overwhelming its defenses, but by a Trojan horse of biological horror cultivated from within, by the boundless arrogance of one of its own. The taste of Eldari souls, rich and potent with psychic energy, had now been transmitted directly to the hive mind. The dark city, once the hunter, was now the prey. The feast had begun, and its true horrors were only just starting to unfold. The screams echo through the void, a silent testament to the horror that Urienthal had unleashed. Commorragh, the dark city, once the undisputed predator of the webway, now finds itself locked in the death struggle against an enemy it cannot comprehend, an enemy it unwittingly invited. The initial shock of the Tyranid incursion has given way to a grinding, brutal war, unlike any the Eldari have ever known. The Coven of the Whispering Spine is no more. Its spires, once gleaming monuments to flesh-crafting artistry, are now calcified husks, organic extensions of the nascent Tyranid colony. The synthetic Norn Queen surrogate, Urienthal's magnum opus, reigns supreme within these desecrated halls. Its grotesque form pulses with dark energy, a living, breathing psychic beacon that continuously broadcasts its location and the rich psychic emanations of the dark city to the waiting hive mind. It ceaselessly spawns new waves of bioforms, each genetically perfected for the unique environment of Commorragh, each driven by an insatiable, unthinking hunger. The archons of Commorragh, typically consumed by their endless schemes and rivalries, have been forced into a desperate, fragile alliance. Even the most ancient and cynical among them, such as Asdrubal Vect, recognize the unparalleled threat. Kabbalite warriors, witch cultists, and even some of the surviving Haemonculi now fight side by side, united by the singular, terrifying goal of preserving their very existence. The webway gates, once their conduits to endless plunder, are now their last line of defense, desperately reinforced and held against the chitinous tide pouring in from real space. The dark city, a place built on pain and fear, now experiences a new, more profound terror. The Tyranids do not savor their victims. They simply consume. The exquisite agony that the Eldari so carefully cultivates is utterly meaningless to the Great Devourer. This indifference, this lack of appreciation for their suffering, is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the war for the Dark Eldar. Their souls, once a source of perverse pleasure, are now merely calories for an unfeeling, galactic-scale metabolism. Urienthal's legacy is not one of perfected flesh or unparalleled mastery, but of ultimate cosmic irony. His pursuit of biological transcendence, his belief that he could control and weaponize the Great Devourer, resulted in the unleashing of a force that threatens to consume his entire species. He sought to bend life to his will, and instead provided the means for his own life and the life of all Eldari to be extinguished. His arrogance, a defining trait of his species, became the fatal flaw that broke Commorragh's impenetrable veil. The war for Commorragh is ongoing, a brutal, ceaseless grind against an enemy that feels no pain, knows no surrender, and has an endless capacity for adaptation. Each victory comes at a horrific cost, paid in souls and shattered spires. Each temporary reprieve is merely a moment for the Tyranids to adapt, to evolve new horrors, to bring forth fresh, ravenous broods. The Eldari, masters of guile and cruelty, find themselves fighting a foe that operates on pure, unthinking instinct, a foe that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be corrupted, and cannot be satiated. Commorragh is now forever changed. The sanctity of its veiled existence, its perceived impregnability within the webway, has been irrevocably shattered. The hive mind has tasted the rich, potent psychic emanations of the Eldari, a flavor unlike any other in the galaxy. It has learned their defenses, observed their strategies, and adapted its biological warfare to exploit their every weakness. The beacon that Urienthal forged, now fully integrated into the Norn Queen surrogate, continues to burn brightly, an irresistible lure in the psychic void, ensuring that the Great Devourer will never forget the location of this succulent, hidden world. The ultimate fate of Commorragh hangs in the balance, a gruesome testament to the price of unchecked hubris. Whether it eventually falls to the endless hunger of the Great Devourer, or manages to somehow repel the endless tide at an unimaginable cost, one truth remains. The Dark City has been compromised. The seeds of its ultimate demise were sown not by an external foe, but by the cold, calculating hand of a Haemonculus who believed he could master all but that of flesh, only to condemn his home to an eternal legacy of hunger. The universe, in its grim, dark humor, has found a new way to punish the arrogant. Urienthal's ambition, now fully untethered from the cautious voices of his peers, reached its zenith in the creation of his magnum opus, a synthetic Norn Queen surrogate. This was to be the ultimate expression of his mastery over Tyranid biology, a living engine of adaptation and replication, entirely subservient to his will. He envisioned it as a perfectly malleable tool, capable of instantly evolving new bioforms to suit any battlefield, any environment. A living weapon that could outthink and outadapt any foe, all under the direct control of the Coven. Deep within the central chamber of the Whispering Spine's spire, shielded by layer upon layer of psychic dampeners and molecular disruption fields, Urienthal had cultivated a pulsating organic construct. It was a grotesque marvel, suspended in a vast vat of nutrient-rich amniotic fluid that shimmered with sickly light. This synthetic Norn Queen was not grown from a single Tyranid specimen, but painstakingly assembled from the most potent genetic material harvested from all his previous experiments. Fragments of genestealer reproductive organs, the rapid cellular machinery of horrifying, the synaptic pathways of the zoanthrope, and the adaptive resilience of countless ripper strains were all meticulously interwoven, stitched together with strands of Dark Eldar neural tissue and esoteric Haemonculus enzymes. The creation was immense, a fleshy, vaguely insectoid form, the size of a small starship, its multiple limbs ending in crude, chitinous claws, its head a mass of nascent synaptic tendrils and glistening, unblinking eyes. It pulsed with an internal rhythm, a grotesque heartbeat that resonated through the reinforced floors. Its embryonic sac was a nightmare landscape of rapidly dividing cells, constantly shifting, hinting at the untold horrors it was capable of producing. Urienthal, his face alight with manic triumph, referred to it as the consummate mind. For months, Urienthal personally oversaw its cultivation, pouring all his intellect, his skill, and his perverse desire into its completion. He grafted specialized psychic inhibitors directly onto its nascent brain, elaborate living circuits designed to sever any connection it might possess to the wider Tyranid hive mind. He infused it with powerful neurotoxins that would paralyze it at his command, and genetically programmed it with fail-safes that would induce cellular collapse if it ever deviated from his desired parameters. He believed he had accounted for every contingency, anticipated every act of resistance. He was convinced he had created a Norn Queen enslaved, its vast biological power harnessed for the glory of the Whispering Spine. The moment of activation was a tense, horrifying ceremony. Urienthal, surrounded by his remaining, now utterly subservient disciples, initiated the final sequence. Energy conduits thrummed, pumping raw power into the containment vat. The nutrient fluid began to bubble and churn, and The consummate mind shuddered. Its unblinking eyes snapped open, glowing with a malevolent nascent intelligence. A psychic wave, raw and untamed, tore through the chamber. It was unlike anything the Haemonculi had ever experienced. The elaborate psychic dampeners shrieked, then overloaded, sparks showering across the vault as their intricate mechanisms buckled and warped. The raw mental energy was not the focused agony of Eldari's psychic power, nor the chaotic fury of the warp. It was a pure primal scream of hunger, of biological imperative, amplified to an unbearable degree. The racks attending the ceremony collapsed, convulsing as blood wept from their eyes and ears, their carefully repatterned minds shattered under the onslaught, reduced to gibbering wrecks. Even Urienthal and his senior Haemonculi staggered, their elaborate psychic shields barely holding, their minds reeling from the sheer magnitude of the alien presence. The consummate mind, even in its captive state, was a psychic amplifier of unimaginable power, broadcasting its own existence with an intensity that dwarfed anything the contained zoanthrope could produce. It was in this moment of overwhelming psychic feedback that Urienthal realized, with a sickening lurch of dread, the true nature of his creation. He had not merely created a synthetic Norn Queen, he had forged a highly efficient psychic beacon. His carefully constructed inhibitors and suppressors, designed to cut off the consummate mind from its brethren, were utterly ineffective against its inherent biological nature. Instead of silencing it, he had created a super transmitter screaming its existence into the void, a living, breathing Trojan horse of biological and psychic devastation. The sheer power of the emanation was not a sign of control, but of a monstrous alien awakening. Urienthal saw, in a fleeting, terrifying vision forced upon his reeling mind, an image of endless darkness, punctuated by countless pinpricks of light, other Norn queens millions of light years away, stirring. He felt, for the first time, a sense of something truly vast, truly incomprehensible, stirring in the galactic darkness, drawn by the irresistible call of his creation. His initial triumph curdled into a bitter, terrifying realization. He had sought to master a tool, and instead he had forged a weapon that, even in its supposed subservience, broadcasted an undeniable invitation. The cost of his hubris was not just the shattered sanity of his racks, or the momentary discomfort of his own mind. It was the unleashing of an unimaginable hunger, an echo of which was now being sent out into the cold, uncaring void, directly towards the Great Devourer. He had not transcended biological limitations. He had merely provided the means for his own species' ultimate consumption. The supreme irony was that in attempting to master all flesh, he had merely offered it up as a feast. The catastrophic psychic scream of Urienthal's synthetic Norn Queen's surrogate, the consummate mind, did not merely assault the immediate vicinity, it tore through the subtle psychic architecture of Commorragh itself. It was a discordant alien note in the symphony of agony and ecstasy that perpetually resonated through the dark city, a jarring intrusion that resonated with ancient racial memories. For the Eldari, a race intimately connected to the psychic ebb and flow of the galaxy, the sheer magnitude and primal nature of the Tyranid psychic burst was profoundly unsettling, tapping into the deepest, most primal fear encoded within their very souls. Oracle seers of the Crimson Cabals, those twisted psychers who could glimpse the shattered shards of destiny through the warp, were among the first to be overwhelmed. Their elaborate scrying pools, usually rippling with visions of intricate betrayal and fleeting glory, turned black, churning with images of endless chitin and gnashing mandibles. They collapsed, their eyes bleeding, their minds assaulted by visions of a gray, silent galaxy, devoid of all life save for the ceaseless hunger of the Great Devourer. They saw planets flayed bare, star systems consumed, entire civilizations reduced to organic slurry. These were not mere predictions. They were echoes of collective racial trauma, imprinted deep within the Eldar psyche since the first encounters with the Tyranid menace millennia ago. Through the distorted visions, they perceived a new, incomprehensible horror, a breach, not a physical one, but a psychic one, originating from within Commorragh's own shadowy labyrinth. They saw a vast ancient hunger, dormant for ages, now stirring, its countless minds focusing on the beacon, a single, undeniable point of interest within the protective folds of the webway. The dreams were less about future events and more about ancestral terror, a primal fear of extinction that resonated with the very core of their species' decline. Even among the most jaded archons, those whose minds were fortresses of self-interest and paranoia, a profound unease began to spread. They experienced unsettling dreams, not of Tyranid horrors directly, but of a creeping emptiness, a fundamental lack of feeling that was more terrifying than any pain. Their waking hours were plagued by inexplicable feelings of dread, an instinctual certainty that something vast and terrible was aligning its gaze upon the dark city. Some found themselves overcome by irrational paranoia, seeing omens of impending doom in every shadow, every flicker of the spire lights. The witch cults, usually reveling in the visceral present of the arena, found their bloodlust tinged with a strange anxiety. Their visions, born from the ecstatic agony of combat, sometimes showed them not the cheering crowds or their defeated foes, but a faceless, chitinous opponent, utterly devoid of the capacity for pain or fear, a foe that simply consumed. The joyous shrieks of the arena crowds occasionally morphed in the minds of some into the chittering cries of a million alien insects. Urienthal, recovering from the initial psychic backlash of his consummate mind's activation, was aware of these widespread disturbances. He witnessed the collapse of his own racks, the shrieking of the Geller field dampeners, and felt the primal terror that briefly pierced even his own formidable psychic defenses. He quickly reactivated the auxiliary dampeners, hoping to quell the most obvious manifestations, but the psychic genie was out of the bottle. He rationalized the widespread panic as a combination of residual psychic energy, the inherent instability of Commorragh, and perhaps even the jealous machinations of rival Haemonculi seeking to discredit him. He refused to acknowledge the true cause, that his creation was broadcasting a signal that resonated with the deepest, most primal fears of his own species, awakening the sleeping echoes of a million consumed worlds within the collective Eldar psyche. He believed that the power he had unleashed was merely a difficult, but ultimately controllable force. He was correct that it was a force, but tragically wrong about its controllability. The tremors spread beyond Commorragh itself. Even distant craft worlds, their spirit seers and farseers ever vigilant, felt a faint, disturbing ripple in the psychic tapestry of the webway. A brief, cold breath of a colossal predatory intelligence, focusing on a single point within the labyrinthine passages. It was a fleeting sensation, quickly dismissed by many as a distant warp anomaly, but a select few, those burdened with the foresight of impending doom, knew better. They saw fragmented visions of a city of shadows glowing with a new, hungry light, a bait for an ancient, insatiable foe. But Commorragh was a place of endless deceit and misdirection, and even the most potent Eldar seers struggled to pierce its veil. The whispers of extinction had become shouts, but in the cacophony of the dark city, even a shout of pure terror could be mistaken for a mere clamor. The Coven of the Whispering Spine had not merely poked a sleeping beast, they had awakened a cosmic horror and given it an address. The illusion of safety, the inherent impregnability of the webway, was subtly undermined by the growing psychic beacon, its waves broadcasting a clear, undeniable invitation to the most terrifying predator in the galaxy. The Great Devourer had received its first undeniable taste of the Dark City's opulent psychic feast. The psychic reverberations from the consummate mind's activation were indeed cataclysmic, tearing through the psychic fabric of Commorragh and awakening ancient fears. Yet, Urienthal, master of delusion and self-deception, refused to acknowledge the true peril. His mind, a fortress of intellectual arrogance, sought immediate, tangible solutions to what he perceived as a temporary setback. He would simply enhance his control, proving his mastery over even the most potent biological forces. His immediate response was a furious, obsessive drive to implement new, far more potent psychic suppression arrays. He tore down sections of his spire, cannibalized rare Xenos artifacts and arcane Eldar technology, and pressed his remaining unshattered racks into ceaseless labor. Gigantic crystalline towers, humming with dark energy, were erected around the central vat where the consummate mind pulsed. These towers were designed not merely to dampen psychic output, but to actively absorb and redirect it, to act as a colossal psychic filter, forcing the alien energies into inert channels that dissipated harmlessly into the dark city's own background psychic static. He believed the problem was simply one of amplification, not of fundamental connection. He had created a powerful transmitter, yes, but a transmitter could be silenced. His mind, steeped in the principles of biological engineering and mechanical intervention, saw the issue as a solvable equation. The Great Devourer was a biological machine. He, Urienthal, was its superior engineer. The new dampeners were indeed impressive. Massive, intricate constructs of obsidian and living shadow, laced with stolen Imperial Geller field technology and ancient Eldar psychic wards, they pulsed with a sickly violet light. Within days, the widespread psychic disturbances across Commorragh began to recede. The Oracle Seers still experienced lingering echoes, a cold spot in the psychic winds, but the overwhelming, raw terror diminished. The Archon's nightmares faded, replaced by their usual, more comforting visions of torture and conquest. The witch cults rediscovered their pure bloodlust, their arenas once again echoing with unadulterated screams of joy. This apparent success only served to reinforce Urienthal's profound delusion. "See," he declared to his inner circle, his voice resonating with renewed triumph. "The weakness was in the previous design, not in the principle. We have merely refined the containment. The consummate mind is powerful, yes, but it is our power now fully under our dominion." He genuinely believed he had tamed the beast, not merely masked its roars. He personally crafted a new, incredibly complex neural interface, a crown of living conduits that he would wear, linking his own consciousness directly to the consummate mind. He intended to not only suppress its independent will, but to actively command it, to guide its endless evolutionary potential according to his every whim. He envisioned himself as the ultimate biological god, capable of shaping the Tyranid genome as easily as a sculptor molded clay. The illusion of control was intoxicating. With the dampeners active, the consummate mind seemed to grow calmer, its psychic output diminished to a manageable hum. It pulsed with a more rhythmic, less frantic beat. Urienthal misinterpreted this as submission, as the alien entity finally buckling under his superior intellect and technological prowess. He saw it as proof that the individual will of a Tyranid specimen, even a nascent Norn Queen surrogate, could be broken and reformed. He began the delicate process of interfacing, gradually connecting his mind to the consummate mind's vast, alien intellect. He delved into its genetic memory, its evolutionary blueprints, marveling at the sheer efficiency of its biological code. He felt the vast potential, the endless possibilities of adaptation and consumption, and believed he could redirect this power, channel it towards his own grotesque ends. He saw the Tyranid genome as a boundless resource, a tool of ultimate biological warfare, now his to command. The irony, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, was that his very efforts to suppress and control were merely making the psychic beacon more refined, more focused. The new dampeners, instead of severing the connection, were inadvertently concentrating the outgoing signal, giving it shape and direction. They were not silencing the consummate mind's scream into the void. They were turning it into a piercing, unmistakable homing beacon, a finely tuned arrow pointing directly to Commorragh. The hive mind, far out in the galactic darkness, was no longer receiving a chaotic burst of energy. It was receiving a clear, precise transmission, a direct invitation, honed and amplified by the very entity attempting to suppress it. Urienthal's supreme confidence in his own genius became his most fatal flaw. He had erected a magnificent prison, believing it to be an unbreakable cage, unaware that he had merely crafted a megaphone, broadcasting his location to the galaxy's most ravenous predator. The illusion of control was complete, and within its comforting embrace, Commorragh was unknowingly signing its own death warrant. The psychic beacon, now refined and focused by Urienthal's sophisticated dampening arrays, cast a long, unsettling shadow over the very fabric of Commorragh. It was no longer a chaotic shriek, but a concentrated pulse, a rhythmic thrum that, while less overt, was far more insidious. This dark energy began to subtly warp the labyrinthine dimensions of the dark city in the vicinity of the Whispering Spine's spires, creating localized anomalies that defied even the inherent strangeness of Commorragh. The webway portals nearest to the Coven's territory, usually stable and predictable in their chaotic shifts, began to flicker erratically. Entrances that had been stable for centuries would suddenly spasm, spitting out bewildered raiders in unfamiliar districts, or worse, depositing them into pockets of raw, unformed warp energy. Travel became perilous, even for experienced Void Raven pilots and Archons accustomed to navigating the treacherous currents of the webway. Rumors spread of portals opening onto alien chitinous landscapes, or showing fleeting glimpses of endless gnashing maws before snapping shut. The very pathways of their escape and conquest were becoming unstable, less reliable. This instability attracted unwanted attention. The warp, ever a hungry beast, sensed the burgeoning psychic feast emanating from Commorragh. Predatory psychic entities, drawn by the unique blend of raw Tyranid hunger and Eldari soul stuff, began to coalesce near the Coven's spires. These were not the common demons of Slaanesh, born of excess and depravity, but more primal, formless entities, drawn by the raw potential for consumption. They manifested as fleeting shadows, whispering phantoms, or unseen presences that induce sudden, profound fits of madness and despair in the lesser inhabitants of the affected districts. Slaves, already on the brink, succumbed to catatonic states or erupted in violent, self-destructive frenzies, tearing at their own flesh as if trying to rip out a nascent horror from within. Even the architecture of the city began to reflect the distortion. Sections of the Whispering Spine's spires and the adjacent districts it dominated seemed to twist and contort unnaturally. Surfaces would ripple like water, shadows would deepen into impenetrable voids that swallowed light, and the very air would hum with an oppressive, unseen weight. The normal, controlled madness of Commorragh, born of Eldari debauchery and cunning, began to unravel into a more primal, unfocused insanity, a gnawing, instinctual fear that resonated with the raw, alien hunger of the Tyranids. Citizens of these districts, already hardened to the daily horrors of the Dark City, found their sanity fraying at an accelerated pace. Irrational fears took root, dark impulses magnified, petty quarrels escalated into genocidal purges, driven by a nameless, insatiable rage. The usual elegant sadism of the Eldari gave way to a crude, almost animalistic brutality, a tearing and rending that lacked the artistic finesse of true Dark Eldar torture. The populace, unknowingly, was being subtly repatterned, their instincts aligning with the primal imperative of the Great Devourer. Urienthal, engrossed in his direct neural interface with the consummate mind, barely registered these broader societal consequences. He attributed the increased madness and warp incursions to the general turbulence of Commorragh and the envy of rival archons. He reinforced his personal wards and his spire's defenses, believing that these were external threats, easily contained by the Coven's formidable power. He saw no connection between the deepening veil of shadows and the beacon he had so meticulously refined. His primary concern remained the consummate mind. He was now spending hours, days even, interfaced with the synthetic Norn Queen. He reveled in the raw genetic data, the endless biological pathways, the capacity for instant adaptation. He believed he was learning its secrets, unraveling its evolutionary code, preparing it for his ultimate command. The consummate mind, for its part, seemed to respond. It would subtly alter its nascent progeny within the vat, introducing novel mutations that Urienthal had conceived, seemingly proving his absolute control. What Urienthal failed to grasp, blinded by his own intellectual arrogance, was that the consummate mind was learning from him. It was absorbing his thoughts, his desires, his understanding of Commorragh and its inhabitants. It was not merely adapting to his commands, it was adapting to him, integrating his conceptual frameworks into its own, far more vast and alien intelligence. The psychic dampeners were indeed preventing the full, raw power of the hive mind from overwhelming Commorragh, but in doing so, they were also providing a conduit for a refined, targeted information exchange. The consummate mind was not merely a beacon. It was a sophisticated antenna, receiving and transmitting, learning its environment, and communicating its findings to the distant, waiting hive mind. The darkening veil was not merely a localized phenomenon, it was a fundamental shift, a tear in the veil between Commorragh and the Great Devourer. The Dark City, once a predator of real space, was now unknowingly becoming prey. Its protective layers slowly eroded, its very fabric subtly permeated by the insidious hunger that Urienthal had so foolishly invited. The psychic beacon pulsed, a steady rhythmic drumbeat in the vast ocean of the galaxy, calling its colossal parent home.